We are back with another episode of Boots, Balls and Bras with myself, Fara Williams, and the amazing Anita Asante. Neat, I'm so glad you could join me today after a little hiccup at the weekend. You recovered, fully fit to go?
Yeah, almost recovered. As you can hear, still got a rasp to my voice. Lost my voice this weekend, so you were riding solo for the second Champions League game, which obviously you smashed it. But I'm glad I can join you today.
Yeah, and we're back tomorrow as well for Chelsea against Crystal Palace. So yeah, excited to be back there. But I'm in studio today as my mic was dreadful in my house last week. And yeah, people couldn't hear me properly. So I thought, okay, I'm going to be professional, get myself in and make sure everybody could hear my points about the weekend of football. But Neat, I do want to talk about WSL, but I can't go into that without talking about the Women's Champions League semi-final first legs that took place over the weekend. We both did the Arsenal Lyon game, and then obviously the Chelsea Barcelona, which we'll come on to. But Arsenal Lyon, we have to talk a little bit about them. Do Lyon show value of experience in their team in terms of the way they stayed in a game that, in both of our opinions, Arsenal dominated for long periods, created a lot of chances, but just had a know-how, got that early goal, had a know-how throughout the game, and then obviously get that late winner that takes them back to Lyon next week with a one-goal advantage over Arsenal. What did you make of the game?
Yeah, a really entertaining game of football. Two very different styles of football as well. Arsenal, like you said, dominated possession. They had a bit more of a controlled kind of game in the final third. But Lyon seemed quite comfortable to allow Arsenal to have the ball and wait for those moments. They could just transition really quickly in those counter-attacks. And Arsenal, we both saw had early warning shots of what Lyon could do. Van der Donk arguably should have scored the chance she had. Dumounet was a threat throughout. And that fluidity of that front three, I think, was really challenging for Arsenal, especially in those like counter-attack scenarios. But Arsenal, I think, could also take lots of positives from the game because they did create chances. They didn't use them as well as they could have, but at least they know that they could, create from crossing situations, could control attacks in the final third. And perhaps, I thought when Blackstenius came on, she stretched the back line of Lyon a lot more, and suddenly things started to open up a bit more for them. But yeah, Lyon are just Lyon. They've got this massive legacy of winning the Champions League multiple times, 8 times. They're a really tough outfit to try and beat.
They are, aren't they? And you mentioned that they're 8-time Champions League winners. I mean, that's absolutely crazy. 11-time finalists of the Champions League. And then they've played, I think if we count the game against Arsenal at the weekend, 149 games in the Women's Champions League, only losing 13. I mean, when you talk about monsters of the Champions League, Lyon have to be in that bracket. And I'm sure Arsenal were well aware of that. And as you say, I thought the opening game, I think Arsenal were a bit cagey. I think they started the game a little bit cagey. And obviously you mentioned that chance from Van der Donk that, another day she puts that in the back of the net and then there would have been, bigger problems for Arsenal. She didn't. They got their goal through Diani. We thought defensively Arsenal, their organisation for that opening goal, was off a little bit. The back line were a little bit, disorganised. But they got themselves in the game needs. I felt like that momentum shift for them, and as you mentioned, there was a lot of opportunities for them in the final third that came from crosses. Marnham had a few, Beth Mead had one that, a header. And then they get themselves back into the game with a penalty. But what does it tell you? They obviously got the penalty, they scored it. Caldenti, the composure on point gets them back into the game. But what does it say then about the two teams? Because it was only 4 minutes later that Lyon went up the other end of the field and got that winning goal with Dumounet. But in terms of maybe the naivety or lack of experience in Champions League competition at this stage of the tournament, that is a difference between the two teams.
Definitely, Farah. I think you've got to be prepared for every single moment. Even when Arsenal are on the attack and they're in Lyon's half, they got to be prepared for those transition moments. They got to stop the runs of Dumounet, Diani, whoever it is, Chawinga, in those moments. You've got to be able to be alert and organise early enough that you're in a 2v1 situation or a 3v2 situation, and you don't allow them to exploit space, because that's what they do, and that's what they did extremely well. In particular, Dumounet, she can carry the ball, she can dribble the ball up the pitch, she can stretch it behind the back line. She took a shot, didn't she, when
Yeah.
Zinsberg was off her line, hits the crossbar. Like, these players are that good that you cannot be switched off at any single moment. And we also discussed the fact that Renard was not playing in this game, right?
Mm,
Which for Lyon you would think is a massive, a particular disadvantage potentially.
yeah.
But I also felt that Arsenal didn't exploit them centrally enough. You got a
Mm.
young kid, Sombath, playing as a centre back with very little experience, and could
And
we
actually,
argue that she was exposed enough?
her natural position is fullback as well. So she's naturally a right back and not actually a centre half. So they were short numbered in that area. So you're right in terms of exposing that. Go on, elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, so I don't think they exposed her enough with their movement or dynamic runs or forcing those errors. Because a lot of the play and service came from wide areas, which is fine. But you got to capitalize on those,
Mm.
in those moments in terms of the presence, in terms of, Mornham had a number of chances, didn't she, from
She
crossing
did.
situations where really she should have been more clinical.
Yeah.
But like I said, nothing. They're still in this competition. They still
Yeah.
got a chance. They've given themselves the best chance going into the second leg, and they know they can create chances on this Lyon side.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think when you mentioned Demorne, you mentioned her there in terms of that anticipation. I think if you look at the goal that she scored, obviously you mentioned the chance she had where she seen Zinsberg off the line and dinked one off the crossbar. I mean, that was out of nothing, wasn't it? A bit of creativity, but then her actual goal. When you talk about reading a game and exploiting spaces that are left, she did just that. She anticipated Leah Williamson going in with a Hegerberg, went all the way in, and the gap that opened up then between Catley and Fox, she just ran into
Mm.
that space and knew that something could come from it. And she was the first one on the front foot making those types of movements. So if you didn't see the goal, you have to have a look at it. But yeah, in terms of that anticipation from her, she had it the whole game and caused problems. But I think you're right. In terms of positives, Arsenal can take from the games is that they know they can create chances against this Lyon team that, only prior to the Arsenal game had only conceded 2 in a competition this season. So that's the third
Mhm.
goal they've conceded in the competition. So they don't concede many. The fact that Arsenal did get a goal, yes, from a set piece, but they did open them up at times, and certainly from crosses, they will take a lot of positives from that into the second leg. But we talk about that second leg needs. And Lyon haven't lost at home. I think it was 2022, and the game that they lost
Mhm.
actually come in the French Cup, and it was on penalty. So it's not even like they haven't lost in open play at home in a
No,
long time. So even going into the game thinking about that is another little bit of added pressure. But they have to be ruthless. Renee Slager said it, didn't she, in the pre-game? This team need to be ruthless today if they are to get anything from the game. That's something they weren't. They were ruthless in terms of that pressure they put on, but in terms of that clinical ruthlessness in front of goal, they're definitely going to need that in the second leg. But I think it's a second leg that, yeah, we can look at all the facts in terms of Lyon don't lose at home. Arsenal will need to, Lyon have conceded the least amount of goals. You look at all those factors, you could argue that the odds are a little bit against Arsenal, but they will take a lot of confidence from what they did at the Emirates on Saturday into this game and know that they can get something out of it. Would you agree?
absolutely. They got to go in with that nothing to lose mentality now, right? It's all or nothing. You go there, you go and you try to attack and obviously score goals, but with an element of caution. Like I said, get the rest defense right, stop those transitions, stop them at source. They did very well to nullify Lyon's left hand side in
Mm,
the first leg. So in terms of game plan, I think they had a solid game plan and they
mm,
executed it largely well. It was multiple errors or decision-making errors from defensive lapses that,
mm.
caused a lot of their problems. But I think if they can rectify that, then they have every chance, regardless of Lyon's ridiculous record at home.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, Arsenal are, in my opinion, still in the tie at 2-1, and they obviously reverse fixture is next week, Sunday, 27th April, out in Lyon at 6 o'clock. So we have to talk about the other game, the other semi final that happened on Sunday, Barcelona against Chelsea. And obviously, we know the history of the games. I think they've played 5 times, and Chelsea have only won once, 1-0, which was last season at this stage of the tournament. And nothing come of it because they lost the reverse leg at Stamford Bridge. But We have to talk about the game needs. I don't know where to start. It was obviously 4-1 to Barcelona. They obviously missed a penalty as well, so it could have been worse. But overview of the game, like, what do you think? It was the wrong tactics from Chelsea? Did Chelsea just not turn up? Was Barcelona too good? Try and dissect it a little bit for us.
Yeah, I felt that the game was like deja vu. It was like that final of
That
Chelsea
final repeat,
when they
right? Yeah.
lost 4-0 to Barca a little bit. I felt that Chelsea found it very difficult to get the right pressing structure and do it in a coordinated fashion. And then they weren't sure really if they were going into trying high press or if they were going to sit off in that mid block, and where exactly they were setting those traps, if that makes sense. So I felt they looked very sort of, didn't know if they were coming and going, and then a little bit vulnerable, which is always the problem. And we said, didn't we, prior to that game, you cannot allow Barcelona to get into a passing rhythm. And within those first 10, 15 minutes, when I saw Bonmati, Gajaro exchanging passes, 1-2 touch, thinking, oh no. Like I was thinking, oh no, because they're already getting that feeling, they're already getting that kind of comfortability with the ball and their movement and rotations. And obviously, as the game progressed, I felt that Chelsea didn't commit numbers forward really in an intentful way, at least. They still tried to utilize Ramirez in behind, get her to hold up play and bring others in, but it just was not happening for them. And then
Yeah.
Barca, they're just a team that can just ramp up the levels, at every stage. And then when they got that goal, obviously through Payol, then I felt like, ooh, it can go one way or the other. It's one of those where the floodgates open or Chelsea are able to consolidate. And actually, Chelsea did consolidate for quite a while before they really got exposed. But let's be honest, it just was not a good overall Chelsea style performance. And maybe the warning signs were already there when you look to the league and the last two games
Oh
they
yeah.
played, Liverpool in the Cup, and even before then, West Ham, with those draws, with those performances, that lethargy in the performances, I feel like carried into this game against Barca.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would agree. I said that going into the game, they have to up their intensity if they are to get anything out in Barcelona. I felt like they didn't have it. I felt like the game plan was in moments to press. I think they were trying to press and regain the ball higher up and maybe create chances from that transition higher up as opposed to deeper. But I felt the connections in terms of that press would just way off. And whether it be personnel in terms of capability of doing the press and having the physical capacity to do that, was that wrong? Was that the wrong selection for Bonpastor and the Chelsea team? I don't know. Or was it the fact that they were just not reading triggers from each other and those connections were off? Because when you break down all the goals, other than the corner, sorry, they all come from Chelsea being out of shape. The first goal, they tried to put on a high press, out of shape, and then the goalkeeper plays it out to the fullback. One long ball, Chelsea out of shape, get a first contact, don't make the second contact. Puyol gets between Millie Bright and Baltimore, and then it's a goal within two passes. I mean, the disguised pass from Mateus, unbelievable. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, the pass was unreal. But I mean, in terms of that Chelsea team, you had players up the pitch. You never had a holding midfielder that's there for a second ball. You had Lucy Bonds trying to get the second contact from Bouillon's header. So that was all disorganised. And then you thought after that goal, they tried to tighten up a little bit and see the half out, and they did that. But then the second goal, exactly the same thing. They go up and do it, they looked a little bit more front-footed in the second half, Chelsea. They looked like they was trying to get more bodies to commit to the press. Now they stopped the ball coming down their right-hand side, so Barca's left. But what they didn't stop was the switch pass that went out to the fullback on the opposite side. And then it was a recovery, in my opinion, from the Chelsea players in terms of trying to get back behind the ball and behind Barcelona numbers. They didn't do that. I felt like Lucy Bonds had seen Pina, maybe she felt it wasn't her responsibility to get all the way in and pick her up. From what we saw, it looked as if she was the only obvious one that could see the danger, and that was the danger. Maybe they thought Baltimore would win the ball from Badje in the fullback area. She didn't. And then Badje puts the ball across the box. But that come from a Chelsea press and then being out of shape. And then we have to talk about the first. Chelsea get themselves back in. Macario, I mean, that little spin in the midfield and playing it out to Baltimore, fantastic finish. They're in the game, right? 75 minutes on the clock. You're thinking, yes, we've had a lifeline here. Let's take 2-1 back to Stamford Bridge. And they don't. The corner, we have to talk about it because, I mean, we grew up in the same era in terms of like basic things that happen. Making a substitution from a defensive corner.
Big no-no.
just talk, because I was so baffled. I was trying to work out as well. When you do that as well, and look, Bjorn and Millie Bright are their main headers. So they're going to be their players that defensively are going to be the ones that are going to clear the lines for Chelsea, right? So she's now being taken out Bjorn. So this is a main header. What I could see was Lucy Bronze was trying to organise or reorganise the team in terms of, does it mean that somebody else now has to lead their marker to mark who Beyond was marking, the substitute who comes in, and all of those communications can't happen during a set piece that's being taken. No. It wasn't well organised, and obviously they scored a third from it. But I mean, in terms of just making a sub during a corner, you're a coach, you do it at international level. Is it an absolute no-go, or did they need to do it in that moment?
Yeah, I mean, we've always been coached in the era of never make substitutions on set pieces unless they're, a set piece specialist, maybe an attacking set piece, a bit different. A defensive set piece from a corner, absolutely not. You've got players in there, they're organised, they know their roles. And now you're going to throw in a player who is trying to get information across. They're trying to figure out positionally where they're supposed to be. They're already under it because they're already feeling the pressure of being behind. All of those emotional elements have come into the game. And then that happens. And I just thought, I was literally commentating to my dad, like, what are they doing? Can't be subbing in this moment. And then they do it. And then obviously it leads to the goal. And like you said, Lucy Bronze is trying to organise. So then she's not focused perhaps on her own role.
Yeah.
And Paredes or Pina, is the one that gets free.
Yeah.
To score. So I don't know, so many things in this game. There's a little bit of,
schoolboy
utilising experience as well. Like you said, at 2-1, those experienced players start, thinking about how can you see out this game, and in a kind of professional manner, keep the group tight, don't make any defensive areas, don't allow yourself to get exploited in behind, have a feeling, a bit of a pulse on the game, like, am I the one who's having to track back 50 yards every 2 minutes? I don't want that to happen. So how do I need to change it? That type of thing. And from then on, you knew it was game over.
Game over. But as you mentioned, Neat, these players, like Millie Bright, for example, I'm using her because she's been there, in every defeat to Barcelona. She's been in that team in terms of feeling those moments. You just spoke about it. You feel the momentum not with you. You feel the fact that you got back into a game. You've been given that lifeline. Surely you've got to, as players, take that responsibility. You can't still chase, an away game when you haven't been in the game for 75 minutes. You've just got a goal out of nothing, absolutely nothing. Probably the second shot on target in the game, and the first shot coming the 48th minute. So 3 minutes added time in the first half. So they already know they can't get up the pitch. They haven't, put a threat on the goalkeeper or whatever. When you get back in, as you mentioned, you've got to use those experience around you to manage the game. And that was something that I felt, Chelsea certainly didn't do, and certainly didn't do in that second half. And we could argue that Arsenal, after they scored, they didn't manage that, 5-minute spell. But look, Chelsea are now 4-1 down. The fourth goal we could talk about as well. Pina comes on as a sub, and I mean, her goal was fantastic. The little play into Mateus, follows her movement, the back heel from Mateus, and then the fourth goal. But even before that, moments before that, uncharacteristic of Millie Bright, trying to dribble out of her area, and there could have been another goal just before the fourth. So. Yeah, I think they lost their way a little bit. I mean, I don't think they found their way in the game. There was comments, obviously, I don't know if you saw the comments. Lucy Bronze felt like the referee managed the game the Spanish way as opposed to the English way, and maybe what we're used to, a little bit more contact. She felt, obviously, she's experienced both leagues. She knows how the Spanish, style of play is, and was obviously well aware of our style. She felt like there was a little bit more bias towards maybe the Spanish style in terms of contact. But look, maybe it's an excuse. Maybe she knows because she's been there. Who knows? What I do hope is that both teams, both Arsenal and I think Arsenal, are in a much better position to turn the tie around than Chelsea are. But
Yeah.
I hope that both of these teams in the second leg, which is next Sunday, can turn the tie around. I'm more hopeful,
But
as I said, that Arsenal, but
just
Chelsea, I
going
think,
back to that Lucy Bronze point,
yeah.
both things can be true at once. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I also felt that the referee was a bit like giving fouls mostly to Barca than to
Mm-hmm.
Chelsea for similar scenarios. But whether or not that would have given them much more in the game, I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
think so. So,
Mm.
like, I saw her get a lot of criticism for those comments, but I was like, it
Yeah.
could also
She
be
knows
true.
though, yeah. Yeah, they
She
can be.
knows the leagues.
Yeah, and it's difficult, isn't it? Because sometimes you play it in Europe or you watch Champions League games and you think, oh, this ref, like, I like this ref. She refs the game, they let things
Mm.
go. And then you watch, as you say, that Chelsea game, and you could argue there were some soft fouls given and some other fouls the other way that weren't. You could argue that for sure. We watched it. Lucy was in it. She felt it. So you could argue that. But yeah, I mean, take that out of it. Just take that whole kind of
Yeah, take it out of it because the
scenario out.
basic things.
One, their players know they can't control. Outside of that, Chelsea need to up their levels by God knows how much amount if they are to get anything out of the game in the return leg, because I think it's a massive uphill, climb for
Mhm.
them for sure. Whether they can turn it around, in my honest opinion, I don't think so. But you can never write, and we always say you can never write this Chelsea team off. I just think this might be one step too far for them in terms of that. But Arsenal, I think they've got a great chance. I think Arsenal have the better of the chances to get themselves out to Lisbon. You'll be out there as well. So yeah, I think Arsenal have the better chance. But what do you think? Who do you think's going to be in Lisbon on the, 24th of May?
Yeah, 24th of May. I agree. I think Arsenal have the best chance compared with Chelsea. To come back from that level of defeat, with that many goals to try and override is just far too big a task, I think. And we can't forget the fact that even in the league, Arsenal have sort of bridged the points difference
3
between
points.
them and Chelsea. So there's still a bit of pressure there in terms of WSL that they
Mm,
can't sort of forget about. So yeah, it's going to be really tough for
going to be tough.
Chelsea.
Yeah, as I mentioned, that return fixture is 27th of April, so next Sunday. But in between that, Chelsea do have a game tomorrow night against Crystal Palace at home. So as you mentioned, the gap in the WSL is by 3 points. Arsenal have closed that gap. It's a must-win game for Chelsea tomorrow. So it'd be interesting to see how they approach that game, given the fact they've got a mountain to climb on Sunday in the return fixture. But talking WSL, Man United on Saturday, dropping points at West Ham, 0-0. What did you make of that, Nate? I mean, look, West Ham, for whatever reason, have really found some form, and certainly some home form where they've been really difficult to beat at home in recent weeks.
Yeah, I'm really impressed with the momentum that
Mm,
West Ham have been able to build since that draw against Chelsea. They seem like a team that Rian Skinner has really made solid and robust defensively. Everyone, the work ethic of that team and those individual players, I think is really good. They obviously have their bright sparks, and Shakira Martinez is one of them. Anything positive that comes through attacking situations is often through her, and
yeah,
she also caused a lot of problems in that game. But Man United, I just feel like, this is not the time to slow down.
it's true.
This is the
It's true.
time to put your foot on the gas and,
Yeah,
and, and go again and make sure that you get these results and you get these wins behind you and you create that buffer um, that they want between themselves and Man City. So I was surprised that they dropped points.
yeah.
Um, Maybe not surprised that they dropped points to West Ham because we know what West Ham can do, but I just
Mm-hmm,
mean in terms of knowing where they want to be when they talk about their
mm-hmm.
ambitions for Europe, for being challengers in the league, then these are the games you have to win.
Yeah, definitely. They could have moved 10 points clear of Manchester City, who wasn't playing until Sunday afternoon, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, the stats from the game, they were pretty even. And, Man United did dominate possession, 64% to, 66.4% to West Ham's 33 to 6. But in terms of shots, West Ham had 10 shots, United had 17, West Ham had 3 on target, United had 5. So in terms of that and corners and pretty even. It was a pretty even
Mhm.
game. So yes, United dominated possession, but I would assume West Ham would have known that going into it. United are going to have a little bit more possession. We have to be resilient defensively. Can we play in those transitions? and create chances from that. It looked as if that's what happened in the game. But yeah, I mean, a huge point for West Ham, who, you know, from the turn of the year have been pretty much safe within the WSL. You know, in the early parts of the season, there was big question marks around them and, you know, what they might do this season. You know, they were down in the relegation for a long period. So to turn it around in January the way they have, certainly with the signings that they had as well, massive. But United, at the end of that game, would have looked at it as a point dropped, and they wouldn't have been happy, and they would have known that, you know, if Manchester City, who were at home to Everton on Sunday, you know, they've probably opened it up for them to creep back in it, and they could have moved themselves within 4 points of Manchester United, and they are at home to Everton, and they draw the game 1-1. And look, they absolutely dominated the game, Manchester City, 62% possession, 19 shots on goal, 7 on target, 3 corners, whatever, and to Everton's 3 shots on goal and only 1 on target, and that was the goal that they obviously scored. But for Manchester City, is that an opportunity missed in terms of closing the gap and trying to get that third spot in the Champions League at home to Everton? We know the injuries they have. Look, we have to add that, because we could talk about Manchester City and, you know, these are games they should be winning, but we have to remember the 6 or 7 players they've out injured. They would walk into any team in the WSL. So they're in a difficult period in terms of injuries, but at home to Everton, and the stats I've just read you, is it an opportunity that, you know, they'll be kicking themselves come the end of the season for not getting 3 points?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an opportunity missed, especially with that Man United result. Them dominating the game, them dominating to some degree opportunities and chances on goal. But when you put it into context, their finishers, their clinical finishers are all missing. You know, you don't have Bunny Shaw, you don't have Miedemar, you don't have Rord, you don't have, you know, all these players. Now Mary Fowler, Fujino, all these, it's crazy when you think of the players that are out at the moment. They're in a difficult spot, you know,
Yeah,
like you can't fault the way they're performing in terms of, you know, the way they play, the style of play, the possession. They're just lacking that kind of cutting edge. And that's because a lot of inexperience as well in this current team. You know, you're having to play some youngsters, Lily Murphy, an
yeah,
exciting young talent. You know, Naomi Lazelle is playing, Gracie Pryor. These are all young, exciting talents. But when you're in a title race or you chasing European places, those players who are experienced, clinical, ruthless mentality you need on the pitch, and they
yeah,
just simply don't have that right now. You know,
yeah.
I actually feel for them. Like I
I
feel
do,
for them because
I do.
it must be so frustrating for them at the moment.
Mm. I can only remember a time, you know what, it was in my 3rd season at Liverpool, and we'd obviously won back-to-back titles prior going into the 3rd season. And I remember it was after the second part of the season. I mean, we had myself, Gemma Bonner, um, Zupa Z, you know, Asisa Ashwala, so she was out injured. Lolo Falls was out. We had, like, in terms of like on paper, like our squad was just like, yeah. And back then, the squad depth was even smaller than what it is now.
Mhm.
And even then, it's like, how do you manage? And you mentioned you bring your kids in, and the pressure and expectation of, you know, obviously we'd won the title back to back, and it's the same with City. Like they're always competing, and these youngsters are expected to get to those levels, you know, straight away, having zero experience of WSL. So yeah, really difficult for some of the players that have come in there. But look, they dominated the game, and would have felt they deserved all 3 from it, but they didn't, and it remains the same. United are still 7 points clear of them in 3rd place, but I think we have, is it 3 or 4 remaining fixtures now?
Yeah,
I think it's 3 remaining, isn't it? And it's Man United have got Chelsea, they've got City, and they've got Arsenal on the last day of the season. So City will be hopeful. United know one of those wins, and it guarantees them 3rd spot. So yeah, really good end to the season with them 3 games. But a quick one on your old team. You know, we spoke a few weeks ago. Aston Villa were fighting relegation with Crystal Palace. Couldn't buy a win, couldn't buy a goal. And the last 2 weeks they've won in, you know, extra time. They've got late winners, and yesterday again against Spurs, another late winner, Hansen. She scores 2, and obviously that the last goal as well. So Aston Villa 3-2 against Spurs, and Spursy are doing Spursy things as the men do. The women do the same, don't they? But they're now on 16 points with Leicester, Aston Villa, Leicester, which is Palace on 9, Leicester and Villa on 16 points. Are we going to say Villa are safe, Leicester are safe, and Palace are pretty much championship team next season?
Yeah, I think they're safe, Faz.
Mm.
I think they're safe. You know, I must have sounded scathing about Aston Villa a few weeks ago, but that's
And rightly
because
so.
it is my former team. I want them to do well. I want them to stay up. I want them to keep being able to build on all the seasons that they've had
Mm,
so far in the WSL. And it was frustrating because of the level of players, quality of players they have in that squad.
mm,
It felt like they should not be in the position that they've been in.
mm,
So I'm glad that they've been able to turn it around. I'm sure the manager is relieved as well that the team have found a way. And it's important for the level of confidence for those players to know, you know what, we can do it, we could do it, we've done it.
mm.
They just have to have a strong end to the season, to keep going in that vein. But unfortunately for Palace, I just think the points difference is far too big to make up at this point of the season. 3 games left. I think they've still got, relatively tough fixtures left to play. So play Chelsea, still got to play West Ham, um, Man City. Like, I just don't see them doing it, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a tough season for them, and we do know the teams that do get promoted, how difficult it is, certainly financially, to be able to bring the players in order for them to compete. But they, if they are to go down, and look, we're writing them off, a little bit too early, but they do look like the points gap is too big for them to bridge, and they look like they're going down. But they've given a great account of themselves. They've been exciting at times, during the season, and yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see who comes up. Which we'll have to talk about the championship next week in next week's pod, because it could go down to the final game. It could. London City Lionesses. There's 2 games left. London City Lionesses are 2 points ahead of Birmingham, who are in second. They both, I think, one of them have got. I think Birmingham have got Newcastle next week, and London City Lionesses have got Durham. And if they both win that fixture, it will go down to the final game where they play each other. So London City Lionesses are playing Birmingham on the final game of the season. So what a way who deserves to come up. So yeah, I'm excited about the end to that the championship, the Women's Championship League. So we'll be talking about that next week for sure, because if it does go down to that final day, what an exciting game that will be. But needs quick fire predictions for next week, Sunday 27th, Liverpool Spurs. I'm going Liverpool win.
Liverpool,
Palace West Ham.
West Ham,
Yeah. Everton Brighton. I'm going Everton.
Everton.
Yeah, I'm going to go Everton. Leicester Man City. I'm going to go Man City.
I go Man City.
Yeah, that's our predictions. Again, I bet all these betting companies that sponsor us, there's our accumulator for next Sunday's game. But Neats, we've got a couple of fans' questions before we end it. You've got them, right?
Yeah, fans' questions. For the first one is from Claire_Bear_McComb. Have Barca extended the gap even further in Champions League as they looked fitter and more physical?
It's difficult to answer. You know what? They're unbelievable, right? And what I actually think, when I looked at their squad, if you think back to last year, and like Vicky Lopez, for example, some of the players coming through that probably hadn't had enough experience or playing time within the squad. And then you look at some of the older players that had that experience. Now they're in the squad, and they've got younger players that have now established themselves in that starting 11. So they have that more energy, but then they have the mindset of they've got the experienced players that can if and when needed are there for them. That in terms of, you look at the balance of the squad, you have to argue that it's probably the best in Europe at the minute. I mean, some of their youngsters that they can bring into the game, super exciting. And even the fact that I think Pina's their top goal scorer along with Puyol, and how many starts has Pina had this season in comparison. So they've got 2 number 9s that can get goals. They've got wide players that get goals from midfield. They've got a defence that's probably not been tested that much. And that's credit to them in terms of their style and the way that they press teams and suffocate teams in certain areas, and they don't have to be tested. But the only weakness I'd probably argue is probably the goalkeeper. Other than that, I think it's pretty difficult to argue that they are stretching the gap a little bit, or that's what it looked like in that first leg against Chelsea. And obviously to score 10 goals in a quarterfinal against Wolfsburg over 2 legs, I mean, that's crazy to even think that. So it looks like the gap has got even bigger. I think results are suggesting the gap's got even bigger. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what you think, but 10 goals against Wolfsburg, they've already 4 against Chelsea in the semi-final stage. So I think it's getting bigger.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's getting bigger. I think, the way they dismantled a team like Wolfsburg
Oh,
as well as Chelsea is just insane. These are not walkover teams. These are top
exactly.
level teams with, both have squads where they could probably field 2 starting 11s. So the fact that they can do that is just incredible. I think the difference as well with the evolution of the game as a whole is you get less time to rest with the ball
Mm,
now. So,
yeah,
and by that I mean we always used to have that term, rest with the ball, rest with the ball,
yeah,
play and move, right? Well, yeah, you can do that, but now the intensity and speed of the game, the speed of pressure,
mm,
players are having to play under higher levels of pressure.
yeah,
Therefore, the level of thinking, the level of moving, the level of constantly being available has to be that much sharper. And that's what Barcelona have. They work
mm,
so hard to be on the ball, they can
yeah,
probably spend less time off it. Right.
yeah,
So that is why they look fitter, but you have to be fit to do that because you got to think sharper to move into the right space, to be available, to be an option. So for me, that's why, that gap for
it's
sure
bigger.
is getting bigger. And players have to get comfortable and better at playing under really high levels of pressure.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
So the next question is from Sarah underscore 22. What Chelsea team would you start against Barca in the second leg and what tactics?
Well, they're gonna have to put a high press on, aren't they? They have to. They have to go for it. They have to be ruthless. They have to close the gaps. Backline have to get up with the press. They can't have gaps between the front line pressing and the back line. Look, I'm not a coach. You're probably better to pick a team, but off the top of my head, if I was to pick one, probably Hannah Hampton, Lucy Bronze, Millie Bright, Bjorn, Baltimore, Nuskin, Cuthbert, Macario, Guru Wrighton, Ramirez, and Canavid. Probably be my 11. And they have to go all out of press. They have to press. They have to be aggressive. They have to get in the faces. They have to be horrible. Uh, yeah, I think that's how you beat a Barcelona team. Man City did it. The time Chelsea beat them, they made it horrible for them. They didn't like the dirty tactics that we call them the dark arts or whatever. They have to do that. They have to get all over them in the faces, be ugly, win it ugly, and put pressure on and play with lots of intensity. But go on, what are
No,
you
you
saying?
literally that was going to be my starting 11. Literally,
Yeah,
literally the same because I mean I was like Guru has to start for me
yeah,
in that front line. I think for her service, for her pressing intensity, Ramirez, I thought, gave a good account of herself for the moments that she was in the game.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I think you need energy in that midfield. Nuskin is good in both boxes. You know what I
mm,
mean? She's a sort of midfielder that can arrive in the box and create around it, but she would also work hard to get back and defend and
yeah,
track runs. So and she's versatile. That's why I'd have her on the pitch. And I agree. I think any restart, any situation where it's a Barca goal kick, it's a throw in their half, whatever, got to set up to set traps
yeah,
and high press and force
100%.
turnovers, force errors, higher up the pitch, and try and transition from there. Got to do it. Maybe
Got
in
to.
open play, you're a little bit more pragmatic. You consolidate, you wait for the right moments. But
Mm.
I agree. This is now or never, right? You got
Yeah,
to go for it.
even in build needs, what's the harm in going? Look at the physical presence of Ramirez. She can bully the centre halves of Barcelona, no doubt. What is the harm in playing off her? Going direct into her. Don't have any risk in your defensive third. Go and play off of her, right? When you talk about playing territory football, that is what they need to be doing against Barcelona. What you don't do is play in the areas of the pitch that Barcelona want you to play in, right? Barcelona want you to play out. They want to press you. They want to turn the ball over higher up. Turn them around. Go and play and be physical and direct, something that they're not used to playing against, and see how they cope with it. See if their defense or midfielders want to get around second balls and play ugly. See if the centre halves want to get in a physical battle with Ramirez. Who knows? But at times I think sometimes be a little bit more direct and ruthless with quality. I'm not saying hoof the ball up the pitch. I'm playing. Let's play with some quality. Get around Ramirez. Get bodies around her. And yeah, be a little bit more direct and physical and gain some territory because they had zero territory away in Barcelona. But
I
yeah,
agree.
I'm not a coach. You're a better coach than I
No,
am.
nah, not
Ask,
at all. But I think
ask
exploit that high line. Exploit their high line.
Yeah.
You know, you almost play away that Lyon played against Arsenal. You
Exactly.
wait for
Use
those
the
moments, and you go with intensity, and you go with numbers, with
yeah.
quality, and everything from that point on is possible.
This is true. But we wish Chelsea and Arsenal the best of luck in their second leg fixtures that take place on the 27th of April. As I said, I still believe Arsenal have the much better chance of progressing, but we hope they both can. But that's it for this week. Thanks for listening, guys. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, send us in some topics, whatever it is, and we're more than happy to talk about it. But that's it from us. Thank you.